afternoon, class. Now, I trust that you had a very interesting discussion a little while ago about pine forest. Can someone share with me what you learned in your previous lesson? 1 point from your previous lesson. Okay, Edwin?
You learned the 3 different types of wildfire.
3 different types of wildfires. Care to share what those are?
Surface fire, ground fire, and crown fire.
Okay, wonderful. Are forest fires a good or a bad thing? Raise your hand and share your opinion. Stephen? Both? Okay, you can. Can you share why it is a good thing?
Provide oxygen.
It provides oxygen. Wonderful. Can somebody share why a forest fire would be a bad thing? And Stephen is our forest fire expert. I'm thinking. Yes, Stephen, go ahead there.
Can easily be burned and can destroy important stuff.
Okay, if it's not managed or controlled, it can do a lot of destruction. Very good. Today's lesson, we're going to talk a little bit more about pine forest, but we're going to look at it from a different angle because we're going to discuss a particular threat to our pine forest. And that threat comes in the form of a beetle. How many people know what a beetle is? You know what a beetle is. How many people have held a beetle before in their hands? Okay, so those are insect lovers. Good. So today we're going to discuss the mountain pine beetle and its effect on our pine forest. Let's start off by looking at a video that says, what do beetles look like?
I'm Mike Quinn. I've been an entomologist for 20 years, and we're here at the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center in Austin, Texas, talking about what do beetles look like. Well, there's over 300,000 different species of beetles, and so they take on a wide variety of shapes, sizes, colors, and forms. They can be as small as 1 millimeter long, and in the U.S., they can largest ones can reach up to 75 millimeters, and in the tropics, they can get up to 125 millimeters. So they have a wide variety of sizes and shapes, as I mentioned. Cucumber beetle, as we're seeing, is kind of a typical size beetle and about a centimeter long. Many of them feed on flowers, many of them feed on wood products, many of them feed in soil on plant roots. So they have a wide variety of diets and sizes and shapes, and the size range alone gives you an idea of the variety. But what all beetles have basically is hardened wing covers. We call them elytra, and those wing covers raise up when they fly, and then their true wings are unfurl below there, and so they can fly. But that protection of those wings gives them is one of the things that accounts for their success, along with their chewing mouth parts, and so they can feed on a wide variety of substances out in the environment. And so those are some of the ways to recognize a beetle by its appearance.
So beetles are very unique insects, and they're very diverse. They come in varied colors and they come in varied shapes. They also need to feed on plants. So they're very important when it comes to plant and plant life. They also are known as pests. They have a reputation. Particular beetles have a reputation because what they do is that they feed on different plants and they would spread different types of diseases among plants. However, few beetles have a bad reputation, but there are also some beetles that play an important role in seed disbursement and in also the healthy, they attribute to a healthy ecosystem or a healthy biosystem, right? So not all beetles have a bad reputation. This one in particular that we're going to talk about today is one of the bad reputation beetles. right? So it is called the mountain pine beetle. Is it a natural disaster or a natural consequence? And as we go through this slideshow presentation, we're going to discuss some of the effects that this beetle has on our pine forest, and also how does this beetle link to climate change? What is the relationship that is there? Meet the MPB. That's what we're going to call him, right? It's a small beetle the size of a grain of rice. Did you have rice for lunch? So you know what a grain of rice looks like, right? And it can be found in mountain pine ridge forest areas. It is an important part of the ecosystem, but it can have dramatic effects. So when this beetle is controlled, it is very important to the life of a pine forest. But if it gets out of control, then it can have some serious effects. And its preferred host is pine, what we call a lodgepole pine. And that's the most common type of pine. Now notice there is a pencil up there. And if you can see, this small area is the beetle. That's just how small it is, right? And that is another perspective of how the beetle looks if you're looking from up top. And here we have a real personal and up-close picture. Meet the pine forest beetle. Very cute, isn't he? Right? Furry, okay. Think it's a character you'd like to meet? Yes? How many people like to meet this character? Well, today you don't have a choice. You're about to. Right? Now you have an article in front of you. Before we continue to discuss about this MPB, you have an article in front of you, and I would like Kyle to read this article for us.
Mountain pine beetles affects mountain pine ridge. Mountain pine ridge forest, Belize, May 31st. A once majestic pine forest in Belize is struggling to recover from a devastating plague of beetles that scientists say was caused by climate change. Tiny pine beetles destroyed up to 80% or close to 70,000 acres of mountain pine ridge forest near Belize border with Guatemala when trees stressed by higher temperatures and years of water storage could not defend themselves. Efforts to replant were set back by a fierce forest fire 2 weeks ago that wiped out close to 20,000 acres of this natural reserve, which is made up of Caribbean pines and home to small foxes, deers, and birds. For someone like me who has worked and lived in this forest my whole life, there is nothing sadder than this, said Earl Green, a forestry official who saw the beetles from the Dendroctonus family ravage the forest several years ago. Belize climate change scientist Kenrick Leslie said droughts caused by global warming weakened the trees, leaving them vulnerable to beetle attacks, and that it was a warning of what can happen to other forests around the world.
Thank you, Kyle. Okay, so we know now that our friend here, Mr. Beetle, is relatively affecting something that is close to our home, right? What area was being talked about in the article?
The mountain pine ridge.
And what kind of damage did they allude to? What did they discuss? The article did not mention any type of damage, any kind of destruction. Yes, Daisy.
That the beetles destroys of up to 80% of the 80% or close to 70,000 acres of pine ridge forest.
Okay, so it destroyed up to 80%. So we're talking out of 100%. It destroyed up to 80% of the pine forest, the mountain pine ridge forest, which can be found near our Guatemalan border. So how then does this tiny little creature, a small grain of rice, can be so destructive? Right? We're about to find out. Let's look at its life cycle first. There are typically 4 stages of an insect, right? So it goes from the adult to the egg, lays the egg, and then it turns into a larva, what we call sometimes, and we look at it and we call them the little white worms. And then we have the pupa. And after that, through the process of metamorphosis, it becomes an adult. Let's look at a more detailed life cycle. Now, this particular beetle, the mountain pine beetle, has a life cycle of about a year. And sometimes it can even take 2 years. What happens is that during the summer months, when it's really warm, the adult would find its host pine that it would lay its eggs, right? And then it goes through several processes. The larva, if you notice here, and then eventually goes back into the stage of pupa. If you notice, when it reaches the last stage here, it is in the month of December, right? So it goes through this entire stage from eggs through the larvae process up to December. And then it moves into the stage of becoming a pupa up to May. And it is from the months of May to June, it then turns into an adult. After being laid as an egg, it takes an entire year to become an adult. That one little beetle that is the size of a grain of rice. So it takes an entire year. Now the significance of this. As an adult, what it does is that it finds a bark, right, in the pine, like around the late summer. And of course, we know that it flies because of remember we talk about the wings? And what the female does is that it seeks out a suitable host, right? So it starts to look for a mate. And what it does, it releases pheromones, right? What we call like perfume, like a sort of female perfume. I'm going to use that term with you guys. And then the male joins. And then the male releases out its male's pheromones that attracts other females to also come to the pine tree. And when those females come, they release out their pheromones and then they attract more males. And that is how they get the numbers to invade this particular tree. So it starts off with one female at the host pine, and then the releasing of the pheromones and attracting more to eventually take over the entire tree. After they have mated and so forth, they released what we call a blue stain fungus, right? That eventually kills the tree if the tree does not have enough of its toxin resin to fight back. So how then does the beetle lay its egg? The parent bores a gallery in the inner bark of the tree, and which is like a little, when we say a gallery, it's like a little tunnel-like structure, and the eggs are laid alternately along the sides of the gallery. The larva is hatched after 1 to 2. The larva creates feeding tunnels at right angles, so it starts to feed on the tree. And this process continues as the larva grows and goes into its different stages. This process continues over a period of several months, almost 6 to 9 months. And then it moves into the pupa stage. Pupal stage occurs the following year. Remember when we saw the initial photograph of the life cycle? And it takes about 2 to 4 weeks to change from the larva to an adult. So here we have another life cycle, the review of it, where we have the mature adult starting to lay its egg in the period of July to September, and then continues to lay its egg. And then here we have the larva stages, which will take place from September to May. And then it moves into the pupa stage in early July, And by July, mid-July and August, it is back into an adult. Now, the mountain pine beetle, once it's located the tree, the females begins by boring through the bark. It secretes the pheromone. Sometimes the tree is helpless, but at other times the tree responds by secreting a toxic resin to pitch to kill the beetles. So the trees sometimes try to fight back. You know, like human beings, when we are about to catch the flu or something, our bodies tries to resist any types of diseases that tries to enter by creating antibodies. Well, what the tree does is that it produces some toxic resin to try and get rid of the beetles. But as mentioned in the article, Dr. Kenrick Leslie stated that the trees of our pine forest could not produce enough toxic resin because they were affected by 3 years of drought. So it means that our trees were very weak. And if the trees are weak because of whatever climate change situation is taking place, they will not be able to fight back. Now, after, what the beetles do is that they bring in on their antlers some blue stain fungus, and then they infect the pine. What this fungus do is that it blocks the flow of water within the tree, and it's very necessary for trees to get water so that they can continue to live. And what it continues to do, it reduces the ability of the tree to let out the toxin. And we're going to see in a few moments what that toxic resin looks like. So then the tree will end up retaining moisture, which is good for the beetle to continue to reproduce. And it provides critical nutrition for the young adults. So when they're in their larva and their pupa stage, having the tree with less water, as dry as possible as it can be, and having it not being able to create that toxic resin to throw off the beetle, it's an essential environment so that the beetle can produce and continue to grow. Did you know all this was taking place in our country? No. All right, we're learning today. So then, we have the beetles carrying their work through the tree, and what we find out is that as they kill one particular tree, one of the females from that particular tree would move on to another pine and then infect that pine. And that is how they spread through our entire rainforest. Now, if we look at our article, we said that Dr. Kenrick Leslie mentioned droughts. Have we discussed anything about droughts in our previous lessons? Has anybody remembered anything in reference to droughts in our previous lessons? Edwin, what can you recall?
Droughts can cause erosion because the soil gets loose when it's dry and winds can pick it up very easily.
Okay, very good. Right. Now, I can recall teaching a particular lesson where we spoke about the water cycle, and we also spoke about the impact of rains and so on the country. And we said that the impact of climate change can either create extreme flooding in some areas, or it can cause extreme droughts in various areas. Can you recall that? How many people can recall that lesson? Right? So in this situation that we have in the country of Belize, we are experiencing extreme periods of drought. Now I know some of you might be saying that, oh, Belize get a lot of rain, right? But there are also periods in the year when we get almost a little to almost any rain. And this is the perfect environment for this kind of beetle. The reason being is that a warm area, global warming, and a warm area is the perfect brooding spot for this type of animal. In areas that have winter, we will find out that the process of winter, where the temperatures get extremely cold, it allows the larvae to die. So they won't get into the pupa stage and they won't turn into adults. But if we live in an area that is very warm, it allows a nice little basket of warmth for them to continue to thrive. Has Belize experienced winter, people? And I'm not talking about when you're in the air condition. How many of you have felt extremely cold in Belize? That you've had to put on a sweater? Nobody has never felt cold in Belize? Well, so we don't wear sweaters in this country.
Yes.
At what time of the year do we usually wear sweaters? Huh? Around December. Why would we wear a sweater around December? Because we're in the Christmas spirit? Why would we wear a sweater around the months of December? Nobody in this room knows why. Clearly the temperature drops, right? And if you follow the weather and the weather patterns, about what degrees in Fahrenheit would you more or less say that you would have to put on a sweater? Huh? In the 60s? Okay, very good. Now think about those countries who are negative and below 0 degrees, that have pine forest areas, right? So that is the perfect setting where the temperature would be so cold that it would freeze the larvae, and eventually it would not have the warmth that it needs, the incubation that it needs to continue to go into its different stages. Now Belize now, that is always relatively warm, provides that perfect environment. And we also have other areas in the Caribbean, we have other areas in the world that also has a warm and suitable environment for this beetle to continue to thrive. What are your thoughts so far about the beetle? Good guy, bad guy, maybe? Yes, Kyle?
Bad, disgusting.
A bad, disgusting guy. Why would you say such a thing?
Because it destroys the pines.
It destroys the pines, okay. Good.
Well, it depends, because if there is like a good amount, it won't be so bad. But now we have an infestation, and we don't need so much, and then they're eating all the trees.
Okay. Now, Erwin, you mentioned something very important. He's kind of iffy. He's not sure he's such a good or a bad guy. And he said that if it's a good guy, it's not so bad. Why would it be not so bad? I'm sure everything in life here has its purpose, right? So why, in what instance would the mountain pine beetle be a relatively good guy?
When they have like the amount that is a suitable amount.
A suitable amount, excellent. Now what we call that is a term called succession. Can you say that term? All right. The term is called succession, meaning that everything in life has its role and its purpose. And the mountain pine beetle does have its role and its purpose in the pine forest. If it is controlled, it helps to also spread some of the seeds of our lodgepole pine. Now, forest fires, which you talked about in your previous lessons, play a very important role in this. Because when a pine forest burns, that is the time when, you know the pine cones? That is when seed disbursement occurs. And that is how you have new pine trees that are then, the seeds are released into the earth, and that is how we have new pine trees starting to grow. And each pine would take to mature, it takes about 80 years. Right? So after every 80 years or so, it's a good thing to have a nice forest fire where the pine cones are released and the seeds are dispersed and we have new pine trees that are given birth. But do human beings like fires? Yes? Who likes fires? Stephen? You like fires? You like to play with fire? That's a dangerous thing, Stephen. Who else likes fires? Who else thinks fires are a good thing? Edwin?
If it's a small fire that doesn't occur very often, it could help the forest with the soil.
Okay, with soil, good. So now, forest fires. They do play an important role, right? And they should occur to help with the natural balance of our various biosystems and ecosystems that are present. But human beings don't like fires. So when a forest fire occurs, what's the first thing that you would do? Can I have one of my ladies answering? Yemi, what's the first thing that you would do, girl? That a human being would do when you have a forest fire, you hear about a forest fire. What's the first reaction?
Run.
You would run? Yes. Yes, good answer. You would run. Especially if you're helpless and you live in that area, you would run. But what would be a national reaction then? What would governments and authorities do? What would they do, Erwin?
Evacuation.
They would evacuate. Yes, they would evacuate. What's the next step? Nobody wants to out this fireman? Yes, Edwin.
They would try to out the fire.
They would try to out the fire, right? Some of us as human beings and as we continue, we do not allow some of the natural processes to take place. And it is a natural process for forest fires to occur. And one of the reasons being, especially for pine forest fires, it means that it helps with seed disbursement. And the pine beetles play an important role because when these pine trees get too old, they invade them and help them to break down and eventually go back to the earth so that we can make room for new pine trees. So that is the good guy part of their role, that they can help to break down the old and mature pine trees so that they will eventually get decayed and fall down, and then we would make room for new pine trees. Let's look at a little gallery we have here. And here we have our newest, bestest friend, Mr. Pine Beetle in person. Very attractive. And here we have the egg distribution. So inside of the pine, this is more or less the structure. If you were to break it open, this is more or less the structure of where the eggs are laid. So they form these kind of branched out structures. So then when we have a huge infestation of mountain pine beetles, you see the center of this pine? It's almost crumbled inside, right? And a human can literally take his hand and pull out the inside of the tree. So that is what it does to the pine. The life cycle. Summer, and this refers to countries that have summer, fall, and so forth. But eventually, over a period of time in Belize's dry and rainy season, our trees also go through this same cycle. So here we would have a nice, lovely looking pine tree, and we have the attacking adult. So we have the adult that would attack the pine tree, and it would lay its egg. And then we have over the period of 6 to 9 months, where it goes from egg to larva to a larger one, and then into the pupa stage. If you notice that there is now a variation in color of our pine trees, isn't that so? How many people have seen green pine trees? How many people have seen them go from a reddish to a brownish color. Exactly. And that is how it looks after it has a full infestation of the mountain pine beetle. That it turns from that nice lush green color to that reddish brownish color, and then it decays. And by the time it starts the decaying process, we already have the mountain pine beetle at an adult stage, and then it continues to another plant and it continues to infect it. Here we have the adult, and these are the larvae. Here we have a photograph of a pine tree, and you see those little stumps that are on there? These are particular trees that have been infected, and so we have places like our Climate Change Center and other forestry organizations throughout the world that label these trees, and they also try to reduce the infection process of these trees. And that's the pine. That's how it looks after it has been fully decayed or infested by the pine beetle. Remember, I showed you a photograph earlier in black and white of how the egg looks. So remember, we said that it was in a branch-like structure. So this is a colored photograph. Once again, we have a photograph of the larvae. Another. That's also a branched out photograph of how it looks when we have the little eggs in the branches. And that is in its pupa stage. And that is how a pine tree looks when it's infected with the mountain pine beetle. Now remember, I told you that the pine trees, when they try to fight off the beetles in its initial stage, and I gave you that analogy of our human body, that whenever we have a disease or any type of disease or virus that enters, or bacteria that enters into our body, what we do is create antibodies to try and attack it so that it doesn't affect us as much. So when the pine beetles try to infect the trees, they produce a toxic resin that is like a gel-like structure, and what that does is that kind of gives a warning sign to the beetles and tells them to go and pitch on something else. Don't come by me, I'm strong enough. Yes, Erwin?
So I'm just wondering if that residue can harm humans. Can the residue harm humans?
I know it's toxic to the beetles. I would have to look up and see if it's toxic to humans. That's a very good question though. And that's the end of our slideshow and our little friend there. Now, we have a concluding video that I'd like you to see before we conclude with our final activity. We have a question. Yes, Erwin?
Is the same residue that you were talking about, is that what makes it flammable? Flammable?
If it makes the
Tree flammable, the residue?
If the residue, yes, that also helps in the process. Because it's a natural reaction that the tree would have to try and fight off any negative or anything that may harm it. Now, let's have a look at this video, and I need you to pay keen attention. You don't need to take any notes, but some of the questions that we're going to discuss after the completion of the video are very important. Let's have a look.
These are the forests of the Rocky Mountains, the green, serene, lush forests that we all know and love. From Colorado to British Columbia, the Rocky Mountains are blessed with beautiful lodgepole and ponderosa pine forests. But something terrible is happening to these forests. A tiny bug, the mountain pine beetle, has done more damage than ever thought possible. As of April 2011, over 70,000 square miles of forest, mainly lodgepole pine trees, have been destroyed by the beetles and the deadly blue stain fungus which the beetles carry to the trees. The landscape of the Rocky Mountains has never looked or been this dead before. And what's the driving force behind this tree-killing epidemic? climate change. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. First, we'll hear from a mountain pine beetle expert, Professor Jeff Mitten from the University of Colorado at Boulder. And then we'll take a detailed look at how the tiny little bugs can cause such destruction. So, Professor Mitten, can you tell us why now is this mountain pine beetle epidemic occurring?
Extensions of the range of the mountain pine beetle are coincident with increasing temperatures.
Okay, so let's take a look at how this relationship actually works. How do warmer temperatures change the life cycle of a mountain pine beetle? Well, the normal life cycle occurs with normal weather, the key element being cold winters with spans of over 5 days of negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit weather. But with warmer winters and warmer temperatures throughout the year, this normal life cycle and healthy relationship just isn't possible anymore. In August, adult beetles burrow into trees and lay their eggs. Throughout the fall, without fall freezes, no larvae are killed. Winter, no long spans of negative temperatures. Practically all larvae are able to survive the winter. Spring, again, no late freezes, and spring comes sooner. All larvae are able to molt into pupae, and at an earlier stage than they're normally used to. May, adults exit through shotgun holes and migrate to other trees. Summer, particularly hot summers, allows for the blue-stained fungus to kill trees faster. The beetles have always brought this fungus to the trees, and it is the ultimate cause for the trees' deaths because the fungus blocks nutrition uptake and ultimately starves the trees. With so many more beetles surviving the winter, enough beetles emerge from one infested tree to kill at least 2 trees the next year. This is why we have this epidemic level of forest destruction. So, now that we understand the science behind this epidemic, we want to know, is there anything that we can do about it?
Is there anything we can do? No. The reasons for this epidemic started before you were born. They started in the early 50s when the amount of carbon dioxide started climbing dramatically in the air. That was the 1950s. That was 60 years ago. Many people wake up now skiing in Dillon and they say, oh my gosh, it's a catastrophe. This just happened. We have to fix it. We have to flip back whichever switch was thrown. That switch was thrown 60 years ago. And we are still piling up carbon dioxide at rates which have not diminished at all. They're still climbing like crazy. If you look at the increase in carbon dioxide, it has been linear since the 1950s, and that is the root cause of this epidemic.
So to see if this really is the case, we caught up with another expert, research ecologist Dr. Jenny Briggs of the Rocky Mountain Geographic Center at the U.S. Geological Survey. Dr. Briggs, so there really isn't anything we can do to curb this epidemic?
This has been a huge question, and the entomologists in all the agencies get, millions of phone calls and emails a year from people who want to spray their trees with sort of insecticides, or we trick the insects by using sort of the insect pheromones, which are like hormones, to kind of lure them out of the forest and into, traps or something.
Yeah.
We've heard people in Boulder County want to hang crystals on the trees to keep ward the insects off. Play music, have high-pitched sounds, but there really isn't anything that works on a big scale. There's no known, effective, affordable way of stopping it.
Okay, so since there's nothing that we can do, then what does the future of lodgepole pine forest populations look like?
I know that lodgepole pine is adapted to do well after major disturbances, and many studies have documented this over and over again. I'm not too concerned about losing lodgepole pine forest.
And does Professor Mitten agree?
The lodgepole pine forest will still be here, albeit thinner.
So we shouldn't be worried at all?
There are immense ecological and financial consequences of this epidemic.
tourism revenue and mountain homes will greatly suffer because of so much dead forest. So, Professor Mitten, what is your final thought on the epidemic?
I do think that this is another epidemic. It's the biggest epidemic ever seen, and it's the biggest because of climate change. But is it going to destroy the forest? No.
It may seem as though this terrible epidemic isn't so terrible after all, since the forest will grow back. But we beg you to think about the consequences that we cannot anticipate, and also how this epidemic is caused by human-induced climate change. So thank you for lending your senses to our film, and until next time, this has been a Communicating Climate Change production.
Now, you've watched a very interesting video. And to respond to that video, we're going to do an activity called Think, Pair, and Share. You've heard about this, I believe. I wonder why. I must have done it before. So, we're going to get into our pairs. And I have several questions that I'm going to ask, about 3 of them. And you're going to share it with your partner. Mr. Torres will time each of us sharing for 1 minute, and then we're going to share as an entire group. So find your pair, find a partner. Now, stand up. Glendy, you can go with Evelyn. All right, folks, it's time to look alive and stand up. Thank you so much for sitting down for so long. I know you're very eager to stand up, so by all means, go ahead. So turn to your partner, and the first question you're going to discuss, which will last 1 minute, and after 1 minute, Mr. Torres will say time. You won't tell me time, Mr. Torres, you will shout time, right? And then everybody's mouth will cease to move. And then we'll move to the second question. So my first question is, describe the life cycle of a mountain pine beetle. Begin. Did we not say that our lips will cease to move when we hear the word time? All right. And so that means, Mr. Torres, you will need to say that a little bit louder the next time, please. All right. Good. The next question is, what positive role does Mr. Mountain Pine Beetle or Mrs. Mountain Pine Beetle have to play in our pine forest? What positive role do the mountain pine beetles play in the pine forest? And my final question is, how does climate change affect the life cycle of the mountain pine beetle? And I need 45 seconds for this one. Begin. Lips. Thank you, class. Sit down. Now, our first question was, describe the life cycle of the mountain pine beetle. And who wants to have a go? Rosalina.
It takes like about 1 to 2 years to become an adult.
All right, that's interesting. But how does it get to adult stage? Perhaps Yadira, your partner, might help you. Leticia. Let's help her out. Go ahead.
The adult beetle lay its egg, then it, yeah, the larva, then they poop.
Pupa.
The pupa, and then the other in December, then it goes to the adult stage.
An adult stage. All right, good. Does anybody else in the group have a more quicker response? Can respond more quickly to the life cycle? Feel that they have a confident response? Yes, Edwin.
Around the month of August, the adult beetle will burrow a hole into the pine tree, the bark of the pine tree, and will lay its egg. On during the cold months around December, January, the egg will start to change its shape into a much larger larva. Then in the next year summer, when the larva is already much bigger, it hatches and it's now a young adult beetle. It starts the process all over again. Then in August, it does the same thing that happened the year before. It burrows the next hole and then lays an egg.
Wonderful. So we know that it goes from an adult into the larvae stage and then into the pupa stage and then becomes an adult, and the cycle continues and continues. My next question was, what positive role does the mountain pine beetle play in the survival of our pine forest? What positive role? And once again, I know we all discussed this question. Yes, Erwin.
One positive role is that when the pine trees get old, the beetles usually go in and help break down the pine trees, and then the pine, yeah, and it also spreads the seeds, and then after the beetle goes in the trees, it helps break it down faster, and then so the tree can go back into the earth.
So it helps with the decomposition process. Excellent. Does anybody have another positive role to share? Erwin captured it all. Okay, wonderful. And my final question was, how does climate change affect the life cycle of the beetle? How does climate change affect the life cycle of the beetle? Kyle.
When the weather change, it can affect the beetle because if it gets too cold, the larvae can freeze and cause the beetle to die.
Okay, and that's a good thing. But what's the adverse effect? What happens when the weather is too warm, which is one of our effects of climate change, global warming? Daisy.
When the weather gets warm, it helps the beetle to lay their eggs and produce more and multiply themselves, and it also the drought, when the tree doesn't have enough water, it can't produce that
resin.
So that the beetle can stay from them.
Can stay away. Excellent answers. Does anybody have anything to add to Daisy's answers? All right. So those are excellent answers. Give yourselves a little round of applause. And to conclude our lesson, I'd like you to number your sheet of paper from 1 to 7. Number a sheet of paper. Just turn over the piece of paper that you have. Number it from 1 to 7. And you're going to respond true or false. Kindly write your name on the sheet of paper. Number 1, true or false. Mountain pine beetles are currently found all across countries with warm and hot climates. True or false? Mountain pine beetles are currently found all across countries with warm and hot climates. True or false? Yes, I said all. I said all countries, yes. Number 2, putting out forest fires can help increase the spread of the mountain pine beetle. Putting out forest fires can help to increase the spread of the mountain pine beetle. Number 3, a single mountain pine beetle can kill a tree. A single mountain pine beetle can kill a tree. Number 4, you can rarely tell if the mountain pine beetle has colonized a tree. Number 5, the mountain pine beetle is an important food source for some bird species. The mountain pine beetle is an important food source for some bird species. Pesticides are the most effective way to kill the mountain pine beetle. Pesticides are the most effective way to kill the mountain pine beetle. And number 7, mountain pine beetles mainly attack young, healthy pine trees. Mountain pine beetles mainly attack young, healthy pine trees. Your name is on your paper. Can you forward them to the front? Right? Submit. You guys didn't know you were taking a test, huh? Pass them up to the front. Let's quickly review the responses. Mountain pine beetles are currently found all across countries with one. Is that true or false? False. Why would you say that is false? Yes, Stephen.
Because not all countries have pine trees.
Wonderful. Not all countries have pine forests. Very good. I'm going to see how many people got that one correct. All right. Putting out forest fires can help increase the spread of the mountain pine beetle. Putting out forest fires can help increase the spread. Is that true or false? Are you sure? How many people say true? How many people say true? The answer is true. That if you put it out, you can increase the spread, because the forest fires, remember, helps to kill the infestation.
If there's a forest fire, it will kill all the pine trees. So then the beetles won't have nowhere to reproduce. But then if you out the fire, they will still have a place where they can reproduce.
Wonderful. Okay, good answer. Now, my next question was that a single mountain pine beetle can kill a tree. Why would you say such a thing? Yes, Daisy.
Because they will need a female and a male.
They will need a female and a male to reproduce and to let out pheromones so that they can attract the other pine beetles. Wonderful answer. My next question, boys, are you listening? You can rarely tell if the mountain pine beetle has colonized a tree. You can rarely tell if they have colonized a tree. True or false? You put true, Stephen. Why would you say something like that?
You sure?
It doesn't really show.
Oh my goodness.
Mr. Torres, can you go back to one of those photographs? This photograph here. Does that look like a normal pine tree to you, Stephen? Would you like to change your answer? Would you like to change? I'm giving you a second chance. You'd like to change. Full. So you can rarely tell if the mountain pine beetle has colonized a tree, and the answer is false. It is very evident. And remember we said, Edwin, remember we said that before infection the pine tree will look all lush and green? And then after infection it starts to look dried and decayed, and it turns into that brownish reddish color. Our next question, the mountain pine beetle is an important food source to some birds. It is an important food source to some birds. Is that true or false? How many people say true? All right, the answer is true, right? We have some birds, I'm sure you know about what type of birds? We have, don't you know any type of bird that? Yellow belly, I would need the scientific name for that one, right? But we do have some birds that seek out the insects that live in these trees. Steven, you need to find out the scientific name for that one, son. Next question, moving on. Pesticides are the most effective way to kill the mountain pine beetle. Pesticides are the most effective way. What do you think about it? Release, are they the most effective way? Pesticides. True or false? She says true. Pesticides are the most effective way. And Erwin says that he does not agree. Why would you not agree?
As the video that we saw recently, the doctor said there is nothing we can do. We just can hope for the best and see what the future holds.
Excellent answer. And my last question is, the mountain pine beetle mainly attacks young, healthy pines. The mountain pine beetles mainly attacks young, healthy pines. Is that true or false? Why would you say false and young, healthy pines look the best? Yes, Daisy.
Because when they are healthy, they produce that what again?
A toxic resin.
I can't remember that. And
Say
that
it with me. Toxic
resin.
All right.
And then that keep away the beetles.
All right. So when our trees are much older, about 80 years or so, they are not strong enough to create the toxic resin that they would need to ward off the pine beetles. So the pine beetles would more than likely be attracted to older, mature pine trees. Okay? So you guys seem to have done an excellent job and listening at the video, and I saw that a lot of critical thinking skills were taking place. I'm very proud of you. So to sum up, we say that outbreaks of mountain pine beetles result from an abundant food source and favorable weather, which would mean a lot of warm weather, which is now caused by global warming, the increase in our warming temperatures. In spite of best efforts, like what Erwin reminded us, outbreaks will occur. They are natural. The best time to act is at the incipient stage, when they have just started the infection process. And long-term management should focus on dealing with the pine rather than the mountain pine beetles. So we can find ways, for example, like burning the trees and having new pine trees grow, or sometimes they relocate some of the pine trees that have not been infected to save them into other areas, right? Thank you very much for your participation, and I hope that you're going to retain some of this information, because we are going to talk a little bit more about the pine beetle in our next lesson. Thank you, class.